Lamb, Abby Whitecamp here with a video for our Lesson 8 Alternate Assignment. So let's get started. I want to start, of course, with part 1, talking about why, or what rather, power is to me. If I had to pick an adjective to describe power, the noun power, in my opinion, it would be psychological. To me, power itself, if it's seen in a certain way, whether it's looking at a king sitting on a throne or someone having a dominating personality that you see as a powerful person, that is all happening, in my opinion, inside our brain, of course. So we see these people as powerful because that's what our brain tells us that they are from personal experience and, of course, our authors of the textbook quote research and everything as well. So to give an example of this specifically, my husband Dylan is very much the opposite of me in that he has a very boisterous personality and he's confident and he's not afraid. If he needs to go do something, he'll go do it, whatever, or no matter what anybody says. And so for this example, we have a baseball stadium, a local baseball stadium in our town where we live, and it's called the York Revolution Baseball Stadium. And so him and I, we usually volunteer in the summer. They have a kids area, so that way kids can play during the game. And so before the game starts, of course, all the volunteers are required to be there and to get to their place in the kids area, so that way they can receive the appropriate badges and such, and etc. And typically, all of the people who want to get into the stadium, whether they be volunteers or people just coming to watch the game, whatever the case may be, they have to stand outside the gates. And therefore the gates are closed before the time of opening, so nobody can get in unless you're an employee and you, of course, go in a different entrance. Well, Dylan, what he has done multiple times is he has gone through the box office, which includes the regular offices for the people who work for the stadium, and by going through that office, you can get into the stadium itself and therefore get to the kids area where we need to be to volunteer. So multiple times, he has gone in and walked confidently past all the people at the box office, past all of the people who are standing in their offices of people who work at the stadium, such as administrative personnel, and he doesn't say a word. He just walks confidently, just doesn't say anything, walks right by, keeps going right into the stadium, past all the gates and all the people waiting outside, and he goes right in and gets to the area where he needs to be. This is crazy to me because first of all, I would be so terrified to do that by myself. I would, I'm a scaredy cat saying, oh my gosh, what if we get caught? What's going to happen? They're going to ask us a bunch of questions. We're not necessarily here to do anything wrong, but you get the picture. So he just said, if you walk confidently, people don't ask you any questions. And he was right. So therefore, I use this example to show that the people, all of the people at the box office and the offices, people standing at the gate, everyone could have stopped him. Nobody knew who he was, but because he held himself a certain way and he was confident and, didn't say a word and did not let on to anyone that he may not necessarily belong there, he was able to get to where he needed to go. And therefore, people didn't say a word to him because they thought in their minds that he had the power to do this. So I thought that was a good example, and, I can't do that, but for part 2, talking about what power is in conflict, of course, we know that power in conflict itself isn't necessarily having influence over someone else's behavior or actions because, Poole and Folger and Stutman, the authors of our textbook have already told us that in any interactions, all of the parties influence each other already. So that isn't necessarily power, although it can be, as we've learned. And also, of course, in this specific chapter, there are tactics for power and conflict that have been discussed, and they list 4, including direct, and indirect, or hidden. And also, I would say, in my opinion, that power in conflict is, in a sense, having the upper hand, where you are sort of on top of the argument, being able to control things because you have the power to do so, or that not necessarily that you're being dominating. I would say that first part that I said would be more of someone who has more of a competing nature. But for somebody, somebody who has a collaborative nature, I would say having power in that kind of conflict interaction, they would be seen as being worthy to participate in the actual conversation. So whether that means that they have power such as legitimate power. So if a professor, for example, you have the power to tell us students what to do just simply because you're our professor. You have the ability to assign grades and to tell us what your expectations are as far as assignments go. And also, well, actually, no, I'll just leave it at that. Sorry. Let's see. Oh, yes, I also wanted to mention that power in conflict is very dependent also on the target's endorsement of the resources that the person who is trying to influence uses. So, for instance, I would say that the target, or the person receiving the action of the influencer, they have to actually view the influencer's threat as an actual threat in order for it to have any effect on them. Otherwise, as we've seen and learned in this chapter, that a threat can be an empty threat, meaning that the target, even though they are hearing that threat saying, you better do this or else, or accept the consequences. If they don't think that there are any consequences that will actually and truly affect them, then they do not feel as though the person or the influencer has the power to make that threat or to actually go through with any of the consequences that may or may not affect the target. For part 3, I do agree that power can become less powerful by living through consequences. Again, not to get personal, I use my parents as an example quite often, and it's just because they're pretty good examples, unfortunately. I would say definitely, by living through the consequences of having a relationship with my parents, because they are my parents, that has changed things in our relationship. So for the past, I'd say 2.5 years, we've had a very shaky relationship, especially. My mom, she would frequently use relational control and sort of manipulation, but I, of course, didn't see that. I actually did not see that until I started going to counseling. And after seeing that, I was able to take a step back and think about myself and how I'm letting her run me over, basically. I am giving her all my power. So now she has her own power and my power to affect and control the situation. So a specific quote that stood out to me in our textbook for this chapter was, the sentence that says, if someone sees that there is an attempt being made to manipulate a relationship, the attempted control can be undermined. And of course, this quote is based on Tingley research from 2001. That, of course, is found on page 157. This was directly related to me and my relationship, especially with my mom, because as soon as I went to counseling and started to see how my mom's interactions with me, especially in conflict, weren't necessarily healthy or definitely not collaborative. Once I began to see that, I began to take power, and I began to take control of the narrative and the situation and lay down boundaries and say, hey, listen, you don't get to have all the power or control anymore. I am my own individual, and therefore this is the way it's going to be if you want me in your life. So definitely think power can be less powerful as life goes on and your interactions with someone, and going through the consequences with someone. So I believe that's everything. Thank you.